Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the FordTechMakuloco channel. Today we're going to finally show you how to change your fluid and filter in your Ford 10R80 transmission. Now this transmission was first used in the Ford F-150 starting in 2017 with the powertrain overhaul. And then it came to the Expedition and Navigator in 18, the Mustang of course in 18, both with their overhauls. It came to the 19 Ranger when that came back out. And it's due out for the Ford Bronco also in 2021. I believe it also applies to the 2020 and newer Ford Transit vans. Now the reason why I haven't made a video on how to change the fluid and filter on here is because Ford was kind of feeling things out. There's a lot of different changes in the procedure from 17 on, a lot. And then of course each vehicle model is independent of each other as far as procedure. But today we're going to show you how to do this procedure on a 2019 Ford F-150, the 5.0. That's the hardest one to do, okay? So if you can do this one, you get the general idea from this procedure as far as accessing the filter and the fluid and the prop in the pan, then you can do just about any of these vehicles because the rest of them are easy by comparison. Anyways, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so very first thing, these vehicles nowadays can be remotely started from just about anywhere in the world. So to not risk a chance of having a remote start while the pan's down and the trans is empty, let's just go ahead, be smart about it, disconnect the negative battery cable. So it's a 10 mil. If it's not a 10 mil, it's gonna be an 8 mil. And we'll just kind of wiggle a sucker off of here. And you don't wanna just put it to the side like that because it can fall back into place and boom, it has power again. So you wanna take a rag, wrap it around the terminal here in the cable, and then kind of tweak it down like this a little bit and put it off to the side so it cannot touch, okay? Then we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna keep the hood open so it can continually vent heat out of there. You don't need to do this procedure hot. You can do it cold, warm, hot, it doesn't matter. Just for comfort, it's best to do it cool because we're down there next to the cats and you don't want to burn yourself. So go ahead, open the hood, let it start venting out, and we can get started. All right, first things first, safety. Before you crawl underneath the vehicle, you wanna make sure the vehicle's in park. Use chalk blocks, it'll look a little something like that. And then you can generally just slide underneath the vehicle and get underneath here on the trucks, F-150s, transit vans, maybe even the Ranger, Expedition, and just get to work underneath here, okay? If you insist on jacking up the vehicle and having it on jack stands, working on a Mustang, something like that, make sure you put jack stands at all 4 points in the vehicle. So for a frame-based vehicle like this, right here, back here before it arches up, and the same thing over here and over here. Whereas the Mustang, you'll have jacking points in the owner's manual, but basically right around here. Here's the front of the fender here, comes back a little bit, and you'll see a notch in the unibody right there, and you'll jack it up right there on the Mustangs, okay? Real quick, before we get started, let's go over the differences in the service procedure depending on the vehicle model and engine that you're working on. Yes, the engine matters. So in 2017, when the F-150 first got this transmission, first year for it, it was fairly simple to service the trans no matter what engine you had, okay? You simply had to come in, remove this heat shield on the side here, one here, one here. It's a split design, so it's very easy to take off. These 10 mil nuts right here, hold them on, wiggle them out of there, unbolt the pan, service the trans, done, okay? That all changed in 2018, except for the Ford Raptor. The Raptor was serviced exactly the same from 2017 through at least 2020 and probably beyond. So if you have a Raptor, it's very, very simple to service your trans. Same thing as the 2017 guys. In 2018 with the F-150, got much more complex, okay? So all of them now have this massive cooler design installed on them, okay? This big cooler monstrosity on the 5.0, the 2.7 liter Eco, and the 3.5 liter Eco, okay? We need to get all of this out of the way as we're gonna show you here today. We need to drop the sway bar down and get it out of the way. We need to pull the heat shields off, the MVH shield that's up inside of here and clips in right about here. All that stuff just to get it out of the way. On the 2.7 liter and the 3.5 liter Eco Boost, that's it though. You get the cooler lines out of the way, sway bar drop down out of the way, and you start unbolting the pan to service it. Now the 5.0 liter as you see here, has this monstrosity of coolers and everything. We need to pull the sway bar, the cooler, the lines, everything. But we also need to remove the transmission mount, okay? We have to unbolt it from the side of the transmission here on both sides. We're gonna unbolt this one exhaust bolt right here. I'll show you guys in detail. And then we're gonna lift the whole powertrain up an inch or so just so we can snake the pan down and past the exhaust right here, okay? On the 2018 and in 2018, the Ford Expedition and the Lincoln Navigator received this transmission. And theirs is very similar to this, to the 3.5 liter version of the F-150, okay? So you have to pull all these cooler lines off and the cooler and these mounts and pull the sway bar down. But again, you don't need to lift the trans to pull the pan, okay? And that's 2018 and on. The Mustang and Ranger, stuff like that, those ones you don't need to lift the transmission either, and they're fairly simple to pull up. The F-150, of course, is the worst. In 2021 on the F-150, the procedure is basically the same, except there is no cooler here. So there's cooler lines you need to detach and kind of get out of the way, but there's no cooler monstrosity here to take out of the way. You still got to lift the trans on 2021 F-150s, but the cooler design here has been eliminated, so it's a little easier. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started on this one. Like I said, the 5.0 is the worst one to do, and this will give you a really good idea how to maintain your vehicle no matter what model and engine you have with this transmission in it. And I almost forgot about all you 3.0 liter Power Stroke owners out there. On your vehicle, it's very, very simple. Since you have the big exhaust coming down the side here on the right-hand side, you only have the right-hand heat shield to deal with, okay? Besides that, unbolt the pan, drop her down. Nice and simple. All right, let's get started. The very first thing you want to do is get the transmission cooler lines and the cooler itself out of the way. So if they're in the way in your particular model and engine and year, you want to get them out of your way. So you can see in the 5.0 here, they're all over the place. So we need to get them out of there and get access. So what you want to do in any rate is go follow your transmission cooler lines over as they go towards the front of the vehicle. You're going to see different attachment points like right here on the side of the pan is very common. There's little push pins right there, kind of pry them off of there. And then a lot of times the cooler lines will be attached to the bell housing either by a nut or by a bolt, like a bell housing bolt right here in the 5.0. You want to take those bolts out and get the lines loose. Now the cooler, if you have a cooler on here, you're gonna have a 10 mil bolt right there and right there. Take them out, okay? Then it says if you have a cooler also, you need to get the sway bar out of the way. We're gonna droop the sway bar out of the way and we're gonna droop the cooler out of the way, okay? So at this point, if you have a cooler on here, let's go after the sway bar. The sway bar has 15 millimeter nuts on them. You can see them right there. So you want to get 3 of them out and then hold it so it doesn't bonk in the head and then zing that last one out. Hold it, slowly lower it, and it'll just kind of rest here. Same thing with the transmission cooler and all these different lines. They're going to be unbolted and just kind of droop and lay there out of the way, okay? So the last 2 bolts that hold in the cooler and all these different lines that's set up like this are the bolts up here. There's a 10 mil right there, and there's a 10 mil up there to hold this bracket, which actually holds the 2 lines in the side, okay? So we're gonna take these out last. Before you take them out, I suggest you get some compressed air up in here and clean it really well around those ports, and then unbolt these, wiggle, 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 pull them out, and this whole thing is gonna droop to the side. Lots of fluid's gonna come out, so be ready. Then we're gonna go after these heat shields on here. Again, just 10 mil bolts, 10 mil nuts, sorry. Just follow them all the way around, and then they come out, no big deal. And then, again, for the 5.0 models on the F-150, and I believe some 2021 models, we're gonna have to lift the rear of the trans up so we can sneak the pan out past the exhaust there. And I'll go through that in detail, but basically we're gonna pull up this bolt right here for one of the exhaust hangers, and then we're gonna go after the 2 bolts, see them right there on each side of the trans, lift her up, and then we can start unbolting the trans and dropping it down and draining it out. So first thing I'm gonna go after are those retainers on the side of the pan here. Cat claw works best. Looks like this one was popped off of here already because they changed the pan for the all too common oil pan leaks in these engines. All right, so cat claw for the win there. And then we're gonna go after that 13 mil up top there and get that out of there. I know you guys can't see all of this, but the general idea. It's all pretty simple. It's just access. All right, so get our 13 mil bolt out, and you can see this line is nice and loose now, so the whole thing can droop. We'll keep all these bolts and stuff like that together. Let's go after the cooler itself. Get that out of there. 10 mil bolts. You can see everything's starting to loosen up on here. All right, so everything's kind of loose. All right. Like I said, we're going to keep these guys in for right now, and we're going to go after the sway bar. Next, we are going to remove the cooler lines from the side of the transmission. So you can see this one's kind of muddy up in here. You want to use some compressed air all up inside here for a really good cleaning before we actually pull them off there. I already did that on this one, got as much as I could off of there. So we're going to go ahead and pull a 10 mil bolt out. I like to at least loosen this one because going back together, you want to mount it up to the trans, nice and even both sides, and then tighten this one last so you don't crack the mounting boss on here. So I just loosen this one for now. They can come down together. And then up in here, there's another 10 mil single bolt that holds the cooler lines into the side of the trans. And it's going to be full of Loctite. These suckers are full of Loctite. You see it on there? So it's going to be a little bit hard to get out of there. All right, now before you just yank the lines away, it's going to be a good amount of fluid coming out of here. So be ready for it. Drain pan down below. And we just got to wiggle and pull at the same time. There we go. Got one line out. And there you go. That's not too bad. But the idea is we want to do the same thing. We want to be able to move it side to side as needed to get this pan out, sneak it out, so it's going to be tough. And you want this down and out of the way. Okay. Now on the side of the trans here, where it actually pushes into the trans, there's two seals on there. Okay. So there's going to be a seal like you see here, a regular style seal, and then what's probably still in the line is a backer. Okay, you want to change both of those whenever you're in here. Change them out of there so there's no chance of cooler line leakage. They're not cheap either. So make sure you get the old seals off the lines and up inside of here. Everything looks good to go. Now we can go after the shield on here. 10 mil bolts all the way around, and we'll fight that out next. Make sure, you get this out of the way because you don't want all kinds of dirt falling on these lines. And this one, the stud and the nut came out together. That's very, very common. And that's one of the things that make this servicing this transmission a pain. So there's two back here. So yeah, you can see how the one, this one just spun on here, came out with it. We got to separate it. This one came out, and the back one just kind of bound up on there and came out with it. So thankfully these are, like I said, separate shields, left and right. Makes it a little bit easier. But I tell you, it'd be nice right now if the nut had just come out on this side, not the nut and stud. There we go. Because you almost have to deform the shield a little bit to get it past here. Yep, there it is. So that's one half of it. Repeat the same thing for this other side. Now, before you go any further, you want to mark the location of these stud bolts. So there's one here on both sides, and then, of course, one in the back. After a while, you get used to it, but just for heck of it, you want to mark them. And you want to mark the transmission side of it. Because on this side, we're going to be cleaning it up on this side, and it's going to wash right off. So mark the transmission case side of it. And that way, you cannot mess up. What do you guys think so far, huh? These are much more complex and involved than the old 6R80 transmissions everyone complained about when they first came out years ago. So now at this point, what I like to do is clean up a little bit. So what we'll do, if you pulled off your lines, is I'll cap off the ports in the side of the transmission, and I'll cap off the lines on here so we're not introducing any dirt. And I like to clean up a little bit. We're going to clean with compressed air all along the gasket surface on here. You can see there's mud and everything up inside of here on this vehicle. So you want to clean it all the way around so it's good to go before you break the seal on the transmission. Same thing on the driver's side here. Right there is the fill port. We're going to loosen that and pull the cap and the dipstick out later on. So you want to get your compressed air up in here and clean it up in here too before we pull that off later on. Okay, so it's time for a little bit of cleanup, and then we're going to go ahead next and lift the transmission up, unbolt it and lift it up for the 5.0s. One final step on the 5.0 models is to actually unbolt the transmission from the vehicle, okay? So this applies to the 5.0 models, and I believe all the 2021 F-150 models. That's still to be determined, but that's the way it's looking, okay? The way you do this is you come back here, and you look up, and here's the transmission cross member, and you look up inside of here, and there's a 15 mil bolt right there, okay? So you get a universal in here, and an extension, and you just turn it right out. On the back side here of the cross member, in order to get to this bolt right here to unbolt the trans, you need to unbolt this bracket for the exhaust. Another 15 mil right there, and use a flex head gear wrench is best, and it'll come right out. Get the bolt and the plate out of here, and then same thing. Extension and swivel, get up in there, 15 mil, and take that bolt out. On the passenger side, same deal. It's just a little bit more open over here, okay? We're simply going to take these two bolts out. So I'll break torque on them, just kind of wrench them out back here, and it'll be good to go. Once all those bolts are out, you're simply going to lift it up. You're going to use a jack and a block of wood, and that block of wood's going to go right in here, behind the trans band, on the metal. The case right here. See it right here? Block of wood up in there, and we're going to raise it an inch or two. What I'm going to do, is what we've been doing for years, is I'm actually going to lift it back here on the transfer case up. We're only going up an inch or so, we're only lifting so much weight, and it'll be just fine, okay? Either way, we need to lift it, and the reason why we need to lift it, and the reason why we need to do all this, is we need to create a gap between the exhaust here and the pan. This pan needs to be unbolted, drop down a little bit, move forward, and get out, okay? You can see, it's tight. It's tight up in here, so we need to create a gap. So with this method, we're going to leave the exhaust where it's at, and that's going to stay, and we're going to lift the trans and create that gap, okay, in the 5.0 models, and I believe all of the 2021 F-150 models. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and create ourselves a gap. I'll show you guys before we start pulling the pan off how it's all going to look in the end. Once you have the transmission unbolted on both sides, you can safely jack it up about an inch or two. Like I said, I use the transfer case back here. I've been doing that for years on different Ford vehicles, but they want you to jack it up right here at the case. Right here where it's nice and beefy. But in the end, it's going to give you that gap like that. So the transmission went up and the exhaust stayed the same. And that gives us just enough of a gap in here so we can unbolt the pan, drop it down, go forward, and get it out of there. All right, at this point, you want to go ahead and remove the fill plug on there. So you put a 19 mil wrench like this, tap, tap, tap with the hammer, and once it's loose, it's loose. You can simply unscrew it at this point, like this, and there should be no spill out on here. Shouldn't be. Pull it out, and the dipstick and the cap comes out. Put it off to the side. All right, and now we can simply start unbolting the pan on here. So what I do is I get the stud bolts out of here first because they're a different size, 13 mil, get them all out of here, and then I go after the 8 mil trans pan bolts. In general, okay, the back of the pan's gonna drop down and leak all over back here. That's just the way it is. Look at the angle of this transmission. All the fluid's that way, okay? So what you wanna do is go after all the 8 mil bolts that are back here all the way up the side, okay, and work your way towards the front here, and then we'll loosen these ones up here, okay, just a little bit, and that'll help it drop and direct all the fluid back here to drain out into your pan. So get your drain pan ready. We're gonna unbolt this thing finally. Here we go. Now that everything's out of the way, transmission's vented, we simply need to pull the pan bolts out. 13 mils, we'll go after those first. One thing I can tell you is that each one of these bolts you can actually get to on the 10R80. So that's kind of nice. There was some thought put into that. Like I said, we'll do the back ones here first, work our way towards the front, and let it start dribbling out the back here. Right. Okay. Back one here. What you want to do at this point is just let it drain a little bit. We're trying to do a nice controlled drain of the transmission. Either way, it's going to be a mess. If we can keep it to one side and keep it in the pan, the drain pan, that'd be great. So now some of it's drained out. I'll go after the middle front ones here and leave these corner ones on each side in the front in place. At this point, you can see we have a nice controlled drain. It's pretty much done for at this point, and we can start loosening these two front corner bolts so the back end can drop down a little more. We get as much drained out as possible before we start pulling the whole pan down in our hands. You don't want to take a bath of this stuff. Bottle's got a big skull and crossbones on it. Danger. Oh, I forgot one over here. That makes a little more sense. These last ones, these are good to do by hand. See that controlled drop of the pan. Looks good. I like to hold the pan up like that and let it come down slowly. Drain, baby, drain. Now we're going to pull you back a little bit so you can kind of see this next procedure. We have the pan drained. We're going to pull the last two front bolts out, okay? And it's gonna be in our hands at that point. But still, it's not that easy to get out, especially with this monstrosity in the way. So we're gonna drop it down. You gotta kind of angle it and pull it out of there and still snake it past the exhaust, especially on models like this where the exhaust's in the way. We're pretty empty at this point, so it's not too heavy. There shouldn't be a lot of fluid sloshing around, but it's gonna be a fight to get it out of there still. Bolts, so you don't lose it. All right. So the filter on this one stays up in there because it's bolted in, so that's kind of nice, stays out of our way. And this pan gasket's kind of staying in place too. So you definitely need to come forward, and a lot of times you need to go like this, at an angle, start tilting it down, and let it out of there. Now that we're past the exhaust and we're at an angle, we need to come down and away from the cooler. And that's how you get out of there. You're gonna have to go down, around, and angle it out of there. Right. Once the transmission pan is out of the way, it's best just to go over and clean it on the bench there while the transmission case kind of drains out. At first, it's gonna be like a rain shower of fluid coming down on you, so it's best just to wait and let it drain out of there. Get a good fluid exchange that way. And then the end will come back and we'll pull the filter down. So looking inside of this transmission, it looks pretty complex inside of here compared to the old 6R80 transmissions. I mean, it's much, much different inside of here. So I've never seen a main fluid pump like this, where it's external like this and not part of the bell housing up there. I've never seen that. So of course it picks up the fluid from here, comes into here, and then it shoots out of here. On this side over here, there's an auxiliary electric pump over there, and that's for the start-stop feature, so it keeps line pressure. And even the filter on here is unique. So most of the filters out there have a coarse media inside of them to filter the big particles out of the fluid, okay? Whereas this one has a coarse media right here inside, has its own magnet, and then this whole front section here is a real fine media for catching all the little finer particles than was ever caught before on transmissions of the past. So it filters it much, much finer because, as you can imagine, there's a lot more in here to wear out, and it's much more sensitive to anything floating around in there. So at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and pull the gasket off of here. It's gonna usually be stuck on here, coming down, get it out of there, and then we're gonna clean the pan out, and we'll come back for that filter. Now it's time to pull the filter out. So there's two bolts, one here and one here, the 8mm. They're holding it in. Okay, so we'll pull this one out. There's one right here. Woo. This one is much longer. Kind of pull it out like that. Let her drain. Now it's time to start putting the transmission back together. So the first thing we're going to do is install the transmission filter. Now when you took your old filter out, you may have noticed it took the seal with it. 90% of the time, it's going to remove the seal with it. Very, very important that you put a new one on, okay? So I have a new one here, and again, I'll list all these parts down below. You're going to put it in just like that. Okay, and then we're going to take our new filter, we're going to get it in here, and we're going to push it up in there. It's going to be a little tight, that's why it came off initially with it, and that'll kind of hold it, and then we can start bolting it in. What you want to do is get these bolts started by hand. Finger tight like that. Remember, the short one goes over here and the long one goes over here. Get it in by hand. A couple of threads. Good to go. We'll make sure we push it in all the way. Looks good. Okay. And then we're simply gonna snug these up. Just get them snug on both sides. Just like that, everything looks good. Our seal's still in place. Perfect. And then you wanna torque these bolts to 96 inch-pounds. These two bolts for the filter, 96 inch-pounds. Now with the new filter and seal installed, we have both bolts torqued to 96 inch-pounds. We can go ahead and start putting the pan and gasket back up in there. So I'll do one last cleaning with some brake clean sprayed onto the rag, and I'll clean the surface up on there. In general, the surface where the gasket is actually sealing to, you'll see it, it's like brand new and shiny. That's the area you need to concentrate on. The corrosion around those points, you don't need to worry about because that's not a sealing point on there. So just make sure it's nice and clean. One nice and unique feature of this transmission is the pan gasket actually has these little retainer nubs in them at the left rear of the pan and the passenger front of the pan here. So it'll actually hold the pan gasket in place. So as you can see, it's a little tight getting up in here, especially with the cooler coming down and everything else. They already know that. So we're making it a little bit easier on us. So we can get it up in here, get it lined up, and it'll hold it for us while we're installing the pan. Now these pan gaskets are reusable. If they're taken care of, you generally should never have to replace the pan gasket. They'll last the life of the trans. All right, good to go. Next, we're going to install a trans pan itself. So I have the inside nice and clean, gasket surface nice and clean on here. The magnet is retained in part of the transmission pan. So you don't want to try to take it off of there, you just want to clean it in place. Everything on here is good to go. So what we're going to do now is we're going to install it up onto the transmission. Go ahead and zoom you in a little bit here. There we go. So we're going to try to go in the same exact way we came out. So we're going to come in this way and try to avoid anything so we don't drop any dirt inside of here. Come up past it right here and get it up on there and get it lined up. Okay. And then we're going to start putting a few bolts in. Remember the location of these stud bolts so you don't mix those up. So I usually get one on each corner here going. You want to thread them in by hand so you don't cross thread anything. It's going to be some corrosion, stuff like that. There we go. Kind of shake the pan around a little bit like that. That'll help line the bolt up. And sure, why not? Back here in the corner too. Well, let's kind of hold it up like that, and I'll just snug them up. Just enough where they're holding the pan. They're not actually sucking it to the case. You want some movement of the pan so that you can line up the rest of the bolts. See, it's a little too tight. So we're going to have to back these down a little bit. You see I can move it like that? That's perfect. And then we can go ahead and start putting our stud bolts in and our regular bolts and get them all tightened up on there. So you can see right here, I have it marked for a stud bolt. So that's wrong. And that's why it's nice to mark the case like that. That marking will be there afterwards, so we know where they go. Stud bolt. Once you get all the bolts back in here, a couple threads by hand so we know we're not cross-threading, and you have them in the correct locations marked earlier, you want to tighten them down in a crisscross pattern, okay? So a crisscross pattern looks something like this. So you're jumping around, okay? Crisscross, okay? And that'll kind of even the load on the pan as you torque it up, okay? What I do is a swirl pattern. I'll start off in the center and I'll get bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, so we're tightening up from the center on out. You want to torque them down to 96 inch-pounds for this style bolt and 106 inch-pounds for the stub bolts, okay? And that'll complete the torquing sequence for the pan. When I'm done torquing everything down, I'll go through in order all the way around and I'll recheck the torque on there in case the gasket has set. Okay, now the pan installed, torqued down, wiped clean, we can go ahead and start putting things back together. The very first thing you want to install, especially if you jacked up your trans like we did, is these heat shields right here on each side. It makes it very easy to get them in and out while it's jacked up like that. So go ahead and install those with the nuts on there. And then next, you want to start lowering the transmission back down. If you jacked it up, it'll lower right down just about perfect into the cradle here. Get your bolts in there and lined up, finger tight, so everything's all lined up and good to go. And then you can drop it down all the way and we can go ahead and tighten them up. You want to use blue Loctite, medium strength Loctite on these two bolts on each side. And we're going to torque them down to 76 foot-pounds, okay? Once it's back down and good to go, you want to go ahead and put the other side of the clamp here in the bolt right there and torque it down to 41 foot-pounds, okay? And then we're going to come back over here and start putting the cooler and the lines back up, okay? So we're going to get the lines and the cooler back up. We're going to put the two 10 mil bolts back in, 22 foot-pounds. We're going to install new seals on the lines here. You see how it has the chamfer? Has that chamfered edge on it like that, and then the new seal right there, and that'll make sure it pushes it right into there nice and square. So we're gonna go ahead and put all it back up into place, and we'll tighten this bolt and this bolt down to 22 foot-pounds. Make sure you use the blue Loctite on those bolts. And then of course, reattach your cooler lines as needed going forward on there. Of course, in the 5.0, we have the Bellhousing bolt. That's 35 foot-pounds. We're going to put that back in here. And stuff like that. Just get everything back together on here so we can start filling it up. After all that, it's finally time to start filling the transmission up so we can finish this job. Before you do that, though, you want to take a quick second to look around at everything we touched, especially in the 5.0 models, because we touched so much. You want to make sure everything's back together, tight, and good to go before you start the vehicle up and get it hot. You want to check everything over, make sure your seals are back in place, all that good stuff. All your bolts are tight. If you pulled your sway bar down, you want to go ahead and put that back up, get the nuts started on there, and then torque them down to 41 foot-pounds. All right, let's go ahead and fill the transmission up. Now, the fluid you want to use in this transmission is the Mercon ULV, the ultra low viscosity fluid. You must use this fluid, okay? So make sure you have around 8 quarts on hand, 8 or so, okay? And we're going to do everything right through this fill port on the side of the transmission. We're going to fill it, we're going to adjust it, we're going to check it with the little mini dipstick. Yeah, right next to the cat converter right here. Fun times. So hopefully you're not doing this in the middle of summer. So an initial fill of 5 to 6 quarts into here, and then we can go ahead and start the vehicle up safely. We'll go through the gears, and then we'll put back in park, leave the engine running. We'll come back down here, and we'll start adjusting the fluid in park, running, and we'll adjust it from there. Now that it's time to adjust the fluid level in the trans, let's talk about the dipstick, okay? Now you may have one of the 3 different style dipsticks depending on your model and the engine that it's attached to, okay? And all of these markings on here are for when the transmission is full hot. So the fluid's expanded, full hot, I mean smoking hot, 206 to 215 degrees. That's smoking hot. We're going to adjust the transmission fluid level when the vehicle's cold. So we're going to start the engine up, we're going to put it through the gears, we're going to come right back underneath, and we're going to check and adjust the transmission fluid level. So we need to modify this a bit, okay? So you may have a dipstick that has an A, B, and C marking on it, as you see here. Okay? This is the marking that they want you to be within, C on here, okay? This is full hot. So we need to be below this, like a box below it, right below it. And then as it expands and heats up, it'll come right into this full hot operating temp right here, okay? You may have an A and B only dipstick, okay? Same thing. Right here is B. You want to be just below it because the fluid is still cold. So somewhere in this region right here, a box below the B in there. And as it expands, it'll come right into it. This transmission that we have here has a numbering system. Yes, it's crazy. So the fluid indicator may have a bunch of numbers on it, you can see on here. And they want you to be between 5 and 6 on here. So again, we're going to be like more like the 6 to 7 area on here because it's cold. As it heats up, it'll be in the 5 to 6 region on there. Okay, that is the way to do it. And I'll also link to these down below so you guys have a reference. You can print them out, have them by your side, and you can adjust your fluid level absolutely perfect on your trans. Let's go over and check the fluid level and see where it's at. After the initial fill of around 6 quarts of fluid, you can go back up topside there and start the vehicle up. Let it idle down a little bit, put it into reverse, 10 seconds, neutral, then dry for 10 seconds, back to neutral, back to reverse, and then back to park. Let it idle down a little bit. We come down here and check our fluid level. Now for me, it was right around 7.5 quarts total to get my fluid at the lower portion on here, okay? So we're gonna take our clean dipstick. We're gonna go ahead and put it inside of here. Lights are dying. Make sure you get all the way down inside of there. See, I wasn't all the way down in there. There we go. And then we can go ahead and check our fluid level. So on this one, it has a number system, okay? Which means it should be between 5 and 6 down here. We're cold right now, so we're right below it, right in this area right here. So that's perfect. And as the fluid gets hot and it expands, it'll be right in the 5 to 6 region right here. Perfect for full hot check on there. You don't need to perform this check on a full hot transmission. Just go to the box below it, and when it expands, it'll go into the proper box for full operating temperature on there. So at this point, we are good to go. I've checked it a couple different times on there. Everything looks good to go. No leaks. We can go ahead and put our dipstick in there and our cap back on. Just like that. Make sure you screw it in by hand. Should go all the way down by hand. Just like that. And then we'll just use the open end of the wrench to just kind of snug it down. Don't need to crank this down that much at all. All right, that's it. Filled and adjusted on there. Wipe it down a little bit. You're bound to spill some fluid in this area, so it's good to get a hose and some degreaser under here afterwards and clean it up real nice to make sure you have no leaks. All right, so everything looks good to go. Again, with it done like this and everything's back together, it's running. We have pressurized fluid in the lines. You want to check your cooler fittings over here. Make sure there's no leakage. So everything's good to go. What do you guys think, huh? It's pretty complex. It's pretty involved. There's a lot of variables here. But hopefully I went through them all for you guys today. And this covers your vehicle, model, and year. As you just saw, there's a lot of differences out there. But the basic general procedure, dropping a pan, changing a filter, filling and adjusting fluid is basically the same as the 6R80. But there's a lot of other parts to getting to it, having the right fluid, and making sure everything's good to go in the end. I think I did it though, guys. Well, helped you guys fix your Ford yourself. I'll see you next time.